Thank you, Katrina and Nicole. Next slide, please. And I do just want to acknowledge that we understand that this is a lot of heavy information, and we're right here in this with you guys. So it's not the funnest webinar, and it's unfortunate that we have to share the things that we are, but we're all in this together. Okay, so on to HUD priorities for 2025. As you can see here, they do represent a significant shift in direction. They aim to redirect resources to address unsheltered homelessness with a focus on individuals experiencing severe substance use disorders or behavioral health needs. There's a major emphasis on treatment and recovery, meaning that HUD will favor models where service participation is required and tied to self-sufficiency outcomes. HUD expects CoCs to demonstrate alignment with public safety goals, including partnerships with law enforcement and compliance with camping and drug use laws. They also want to see an increase in self-sufficiency and economic stability, so projects demonstrating strong employment outcomes and clear pathways towards independence will be scored higher. They further expect CoCs to rank projects based on measurable results specific to the improvements that I mentioned. So self-sufficiency, increases in employment income, treatment engagement, and demonstrated reductions in homelessness. And finally, HUD emphasizes minimizing trauma by requiring trauma-informed approaches, prioritizing participant safety, and ensuring safe access to safe single-sex spaces for women. Do you guys have anything to add for this one? All right, next slide. So going into the tier structure changes, to create the priority listing, projects applying for funding through the local competition will be reviewed and ranked by an independent review panel and placed into tier 1 or tier 2. As I mentioned earlier, this year's tier structure represents a significant shift from previous years. Tier 1 now only protects 30% of our annual renewal demand, while the remaining 70%, including any bonus projects, fall into tier 2. So what this means is that the majority of our local projects will be competing at the national level, where funding is dependent on both the project's individual score and the overall CoC score. So because of this narrow scoring margin, even small scoring differences can lead to substantial funding impacts or funding loss. If you look at this estimated ARD report here, I can barely see it on my laptop, but if you look at the tier 1, which is basically like our guaranteed funding, so projects that get placed here will likely be funded, and it's only 2.4 million, where in previous rounds the tier 1 was, I think last year was 90 or 94%. So as you can see, with such a limited portion of funding secured in tier 1, the strength of our applications, alignment with HUD's priorities, and how or which applications are ranked and placed into tier 1 will be critical in this competition this year. And if Katrina and Nicole don't have anything to add, we can go on to the next slide. So in addition to all of that, the narrower funding structure and all the bad news we've already heard, HUD has also introduced several rules specific to project types. The biggest one is the permanent housing cap, which limits permanent housing projects, including permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and joint TH and RRH, to no more than 30% of our annual renewal demand. So this will likely require our CoC, as Katrina mentioned, to shift some of funding to other project types like transitional housing and supportive services only. It's also important to note that joint TH and RRH projects are limited to renewals only this year. HUD has also introduced new conditions that could deem projects ineligible. This includes the use of racial preferences, harm reduction language, or non-binary sex definitions. In addition, the service requirements for new projects are much more specific this year. Transitional housing must include 40 hours per week of tailored services. Street outreach must show formal partnerships with law enforcement. Permanent supportive housing must be designed to serve individuals who are elderly or have a physical disability. And permanent supportive housing projects must also require service participation and cannot primarily serve individuals with substance use disorders or mental health conditions. Go ahead, Katrina.
Sorry, I didn't, wanted you to finish, but I just want to also let you know about some of these disqualifiers. Um, it doesn't mean we can't continue to do things like serving with harm reduction in mind, or serving those with that are non-binary or have other kind of sex definitions. It just means that you guys can't add these to your applications. You know, serving humans. We're still serving humans, no matter what their backgrounds are, and we want to do it in a dignified and respectful, in a harm reduction, trauma reduced way. So just keeping that in mind, that although we cannot add these things to our applications, doesn't mean that we still don't serve with compassion and care to all humans. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Katrina. Um, and lastly, that rapid rehousing must rapid rehousing must demonstrate strong employment outcomes and also must require service participation. So as you can see, a lot of service requirements that we didn't see before across the board. And with all of these shifts, again, it's crucial that each project type clearly aligns with HUD's expectations in order for us to be successful in this competition. All right, next slide, Nicole.
Before we hop to the next slide, I'll also just say, right, the additional requirements are something very new to all of us. And so, like, especially the 40 hours per week per participant for transitional housing, is something I don't think any of us were expecting, because 40 hours per week per participant would mean a single case manager to every person. So we have questions out to HUD already. We've already submitted to the CoC NOFO Ask a Question, and we're just waiting for some responses that we're not sure that they even know. Additionally, just making sure that as you see PSH, you have to serve elderly or physically disabled, period. They were very specific. Doesn't seem to be much wiggle room for those who have serious mental illness or any other mental health disability. So just making a clear note of that is, if it's new, it's got to serve these populations. And for the street outreach, it's law enforcement partnerships required, and that you can prove that you are part of the enforcement, which is also a question that we have out to HUD. What does that mean? So we've got some things already brewing, and we'll be sure to include those in FAQs as soon as we receive our response. And if anything, we'll be able to send it out to everybody once we do get that, because those are some important questions that not only our community has, but that other communities also have. So we're keeping an eye out, and we're going to try and collect any questions that you all have here as well to send additionally if there are more.
Yes, and we're hoping to be able to get responses and provide answers as soon as possible through our FAQ and the CoC, the upcoming CoC meeting, and the local competition orientation. Um, Thank you, Nicole and Katrina. And I'm actually going to hand it over to you, Nicole, to talk more about the review and selection process.
Yes, so Abrina touched on this a little bit earlier, right? This year, tier two is very heavily reliant on what your CoC score is. So that's about 50% of a total project score when they fall into that tier two. So it has a huge impact on how well our tier two projects do. And this year they've changed the criteria and named it merit review. So some of the things that HUD will be evaluating is required participation and supportive services across all funded projects. So you can lose points if not all of the projects require these supportive services. A minimum number of treatment and recovery beds based on your CoC's population. So again, it's like a full point type situation or maybe half points depending on the percentage of those beds. There's on-site treatment availability within funded programs. So again, that's if it's available or if it's not, you can get maybe some points, but if you want all points, then it needs to be readily available within all funded programs. That there are within our geographic area 24/7 access to detox and or inpatient treatment programs and centers, that there are formal partnerships with community behavioral health clinics and behavioral health providers, that there's strong alignment with law enforcement, including coordinated with our street outreach. And that again, there is this enforcement piece that we do and will participate in the enforcement of these sort of no camping bans and these no drug and these drug bans. At least 30% of the CoC funds should be designated for supportive service only projects or for service projects. There should be a commitment to share data and a process, like an already created process to share data with state and local agencies. Thankfully, our Cal ICH we do share our data with the state, so we should be good there. And then within local agencies, we have like our monitoring and evaluations committee where we're able to share data with our counties and with our cities. Collaboration with law enforcement for homeless sex offender mapping. So this is like a requirement basically that you help map where all of the homeless sex offenders are and you help provide that information to law enforcement. Um, Other local policy compliance things that are considered. So if we do have local laws related to public camping and illicit drug use, you receive points. If there are enforcement protocols across the entire CoC geography, then you receive points. And again, we have questions on what does enforcement protocols mean? What does that look like? If there is use of involuntary commitment standards, so forcing people into institutionalization, California does not have any sort of law or anything related to that, and I don't believe our county does as well, so we would not receive full points for that or any. And then state compliance with SORNA, and our state does not comply with SORNA. That is the immigration enforcement tool that they use to check immigration status before receiving services. And our state does not have a compliance law, or we do not comply necessarily with SORNA. So we would not receive points there either. So when looking at this, we are going to try our best as the CoC to meet some of these priorities. We've got a lot of things going for us. We have partnerships with law enforcement. We are working very closely right now, even with some police departments as we do the pick count. So hopefully those things will be favorable to us in this scoring. But we will be realistically missing out on some points just because we don't have involuntary commitment standards. We don't have a state that complies with SORNA. And we're not sure what it means when it says enforcement protocols. And if all of our projects at the end of the day do say they will require supportive services, which according to NAEH and some guidance from them is, start changing program guidelines and update your program guidelines with your participants to at least say something like this in order to be competitive in the application. And then the CoC itself will receive full points if all of the projects require this supportive services. And then Bree also talked a little bit about this, but the new thing is a risk review. So there has always been some level of this risk review where HUD evaluates projects based on their financial stability, based on their staffing capacities, history, and performance on CoC grants, as well as your timeliness of your drawdowns, making sure that they're quarterly, and if you have any audit findings. But some new additions are that they will be assessing past activities or policies that conflict with the purposes of this NOFO. And we take that to mean those that are those projects and even entire providers. So we are looking for guidance on that. But those that have safe drug use or safe consumption activities, as well as harm reduction activities, um, those programs that have used non-binary sex definitions before in their programming and any discriminatory practices based on race or anything like that. HUD reserves the right, they say, to reduce scores, reduce funding, or completely deny awards based on this risk review finding. We are looking for that clarification if this means specifically for the project that is being applied for, or if it means the entire provider. So they will be looking at your entire provider history, which is in direct conflict with everything they have told us the last 10 years, right? So just last year, we were required to provide these things. And now this year, you're saying you'll possibly deny awards based on the things you told us to do last year. So this is also a question that we have out to HUD is what does this mean? How far back does this go? Um, does it include the entire provider's history or just this of the project? But considering that if you are CoC funded currently, you had to do some sort of harm reduction, you were making sure to respect people's gender identities. We were interested in racial equity and making sure that our projects were racially equitable. And this was all requirements of the previous NOFO. So we have questions about that out as well to understand at least a little better what that's supposed to mean for our projects. Because this really just leaves it up to HUD to be able to pull whatever project they want to pull off of our list and not fund them. So um, we are very weary of these new additions. But we will try and provide as much guidance as possible as soon as we hear it from HUD. The next is the project selection process. So first off the top, CoC planning grants are the only non-competitive projects this year. So those planning grants will be awarded first. And then your tier one projects that pass project quality and project eligibility thresholds will be next. And then HUD goes into our tier two. And tier two this year is a value of up to 100 points. This will include YHDP renewals and DV bonus this year. So up to 50 points in direct proportion of your CoC score. That's 50% of your score is based on whatever the CoC scores. And then up to 40 points for the CoC's ranking of the project. So the higher your rank in tier two, the more points that project is assigned. And then only 10 points are left over, and that's for projects that have or have stated that they will require service participation, evidenced in an occupancy agreement or like some sort of equivalent document. Um, and that is the entire way that they are going to rank tier two and select those types of projects. Um, that would mean that if our CoC scored low in our merit review, but you are the first project in our tier two, a CoC that scored higher than us and had a lower tier two project could get funded over our tier two projects. So you're not just competing right now in the local competition to get on that tier two and the highest possible score. We are competing nationally now, in order to make sure that we can fulfill our ARD and get as much of that money as possible, which is why we are going to try our best at the coalition to try and get the highest score humanly possible for our CoC overall score so that those of you that fall in tier two have the best chance that you have in order to compete against these other national projects. Any permanent housing projects that have been submitted into tier two and we've already exceeded our 30% cap will just be automatically removed from tier two, and everyone's project scores will be adjusted accordingly. So everyone will move up a rank, and then you will be given those points based on that rank. Instead of what the CoC submitted, assuming we submit some tier two projects um, out outside of the 30% permanent housing cap. So those projects will just be automatically removed. Um, in the project review, HUD included very specific language about reserving the right to fund applications in whole or in part, fund applications at a lower amount than requested, choose to fund no applications under this NOFO, adjust funding for an application to ensure geographic dispersion and alignment with program or administrative priorities, withdraw an award offer and make an offer of funding to another eligible application if terms and conditions are not finalized or met, use additional funds made available after the NOFO to fully fund an application or fund additional applications, correct HUD review and selection errors. So if HUD submits an error that causes an applicant not to be selected, they can make that award to the applicant when and if funding is available. Or completely just release a whole nother NOFO if funding is available and if HUD does not receive applications of merit. So choosing to fund no applications under this NOFO and then releasing another one because they deem that they have not received applications of merit are definitely points that worry us because we saw them do that with CoC builds is they've released and re-released and then re-released again CoC builds because they deemed that they did not receive applications of merit. And then ended up putting greater restrictions so that West Coast cities and those, especially, it felt like that supported immigration and or gender identities, that those would be penalized further. So that is something that we have seen them do is to just re-release a NOFO. So that is something that we know that they are capable of. So some project and funding implications. 70% of our funding is now competitive, and not just competitive like between each other, but competitive nationally. Um, so as much as possible, we will try to provide as much guidance as we can to everybody about how to make your application the most competitive that it can be. You have a scoring advantage if you are going to require services. And even if you look at each of the different transitional housing, rapid rehousing, permanent support, it doesn't matter. You need to require services in order to get those 10 points for your project scores with it, especially if you fall within that tier two. Permanent housing heavy systems have to reallocate to meet our 30% housing cap. So if only 30% of our awards go into PH projects, we have to identify which permanent housing projects to rank and determine reallocation pathways for others. And that is where we can consider those transition grants because HUD is granting those this year. You have 1 year to transition your project into a new type, but it has to be by the same provider. You cannot switch providers while doing this. So say, for example, The coalition wants to do transitional housing, but would rather, um, maybe we're not a good example, but we have a permanent housing project, we want to transition it, it has to stay under the coalition's name. So that's what that means is you can transition your permanent housing or any other type of grant into another type of grant, but it has to stay with that same person who applied this last year. Um, prioritizing projects for prioritizing new projects that have that treatment, recovery, safety, and service requirements is something that is a possible strategy for reallocation. And then having street outreach and transitional housing projects with robust wraparound services will score strongly. So some considerations for you all is documenting your strong law enforcement partnerships. We know a lot of our outreach teams, if not all of them, I'm sure do have that already. Strengthening our behavioral health treatment access. There are points for the CoC for if we can demonstrate that we leverage some behavioral health or other type of funding within our continuum of care and within projects. Increasing our employment focused services and our tracking, especially. They're going to look at HMIS and they're going to look at our system performance measures for this. So it's not like I can just submit. We know that our providers do this. They're basing it off of HMIS. So if that's not getting tracked in HMIS, then we're not going to get the points that we need in order to have that employment focused those employment focused points or those service tracking points. Ensuring compliance with newly prohibited activities, right? And unfortunately, that just means for those projects that have been respecting gender identity, which I think have been all of them, unfortunately, trying to find a way to reword what you say, but requiring that you have to have language in there that you only recognize the sex binary within people. And then updating your service participation agreements across all of your projects. We don't know if that means just your CoC funded projects or if that means it's got to be all of the projects. But updating your service participation agreements, at least for those that are CoC funded.
Nicole, I just want to offer some support when writing your application, using try not to use generic like mission language, phrases starting like we hope, we plan, we intend. You have to look at real system transformation, and have evidence-based outcomes with the data to back it up. So again, we're pulling APRs, we're looking at your HMIS data. So it can't waver in the data that you're providing, because then when our rankers are looking at these things, they're like, well, this application says this, but their HMIS says something totally different. And if you are going to do that, what is the data backup that you're going to provide that validates this? Also looking in, real cross system partnerships. Again, how Nicole was talking about how you're working with healthcare, workforce, the child welfare, the judicial system, and staying really focused on access pathways. So something that I would just like to offer you guys as some strategy, narrative talking points, and talking about past accomplishments with no data to back it up is not going to be beneficial to your application.
Thank you, Kat. And then lastly, there are some post-award changes, right? So there are compliance with new provisions, and these are the ones that we sort of expected to see, and have possibly already seen in some of your FY24 contracts for those that are currently CoC funded. But there are immigration requirements and compliance with Executive Order 14218. faith-based regulations that just say you don't discriminate against faith-based providers, environmental regulations, the Freedom of Information Act, waste, fraud, abuse, and whistleblower protections, and that you will um, comply with presidential executive orders that affect federal financial assistance programs. And that is the defending women's one, the one about protecting our streets and keeping them safe. So all of those executive orders you would be required to comply with as well. Other things are for verifications. So you just have to verify that funds will not be used for the following, including subsidizing or facilitating racial preferences, using any definition of sex other than binary, to fund, promote, encourage, or subsidize, facilitate the use of illicit drugs, and other harm reduction activities. So like safe consumption sites, needle exchange. And then we do have a question out to them about, how far does harm reduction go? Does that include things like methadone, and methadone clinics and things like that? So that's another question we have out to them, and we'll be waiting for their response. And then I think I turn it back over.
Oh, that's me. All right, next we'll talk about our next steps and what life looks like on the CoC for us and you all. If I can get the next slide, please. Okay, so a lot of things that Nicole talked about, but really want to reemphasize that we'll be having a special leadership council meeting on December 2nd that is open to the public. So all of you who are not leadership council members may attend to hear how we're going to strategize on prioritizing our local competition. We have some really hard decisions to make, and the coalition cannot make them alone. It's a community-wide effort. We need to have all of our leaders bought into how we're going to launch and rank this new competition, and also see how we're going to maximize community investments. Like I said, with the 30% permanent housing gap, that's $3.1 million of previously funded projects that we cannot fund through this application, this competition. So how is our community rallying to help fill in those gaps? I'm gonna be honest, it's a heavy lift, and seeing where the funding is going to come from is really difficult at this point. So strategizing on what is best for our community and how you all decide to make adjustments to your applications and your current projects in order to fill the requirements of this new NOFO. It doesn't feel great, but we have to kind of take feelings aside because our continuum is in no place at this moment to not go for federal funding. We will continue to look for other avenues of funding for our community, and that is something that Nicole and I are dedicated to do. With this all going on, our focus is the NOFO, but we have other projects going on with the point in time count, all of our federal and state reporting. So that is what I'm trying to say is we're not diverting from looking for additional funding for our community. So just keeping that in mind, and please mark your calendars for December 2nd. If you have not gotten the invite to attend this strategy meeting, please drop your email in the chat and we will forward it over to you. Next slide. So we sent this out yesterday of our proposed timeline. I would just like you all to know that these timelines can change depending on a number of things. but this is what we're really trying to stick to in order to avoid extensive work being done over the holidays. We understand this NOFO dropped at the worst time, with this being the week of Thanksgiving, and then we're going into Christmas and New Year's, and everyone loves to take time off. We have some, I have bolded here some key dates, and you'll see it's a very tight turnaround. We'll have your applications due to us on a Sunday. That just gives us more time for technical review to reach out to you all, to see if there's anything missing from your contract, from your application, or clarifications before it's passed over to our review panel. Our review panel has volunteered to do this work, knowing that the initial timeline was for them to work over the holidays, but we condensed it in order to give everybody some much needed rest and family time. You'll see here that we'll make the primary ranking notifications on 12/18. And then you have literally till 12 p.m. the next day to put in any appeals, so that we can rally our appeal panel and get them all up to date on what is the application is being, what applications are being or is appealing their determination, knowing that we can go to the leadership council, and they can make adjustments to the priority listing how they see fit. The ultimate decision lies with the leadership council. We will give them everything possible so that they can make educated and sound approvals for the priority listing. We will do the primary, the final priority listing announcement shortly after the leadership council meeting, hoping by the end of the day, so that everybody can start working on their project applications in eSnaps. So if there was any adjustments or questions, but as of now, Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, eSnaps was not open for us to start our applications, to try to get ahead of time. We have also changed the way that we're going to launch our local competition. We will no longer be using Submittable to kind of slim time down or give us more time. So our application is going to be in like a Word document, so that we don't have to do the technical assistance and training on Submittable and how to utilize that platform, and give everybody as much time as we can. CHSP will do our technical review from January 7th to January 13th, and that gives us like a day to submit our consolidated application and our whole COC's package. So we did our best, and just know that we understand where we're at and that it's extremely condensed, and we're here for you. Like Abrina had mentioned, we will update all our website with FAQs, frequently asked questions. We are connected with the National Alliance on Homelessness, CalCub. There's a meeting with Joe Coletti tomorrow on strategizing, or today, I think it's later on today, on strategizing for this NOFO. We're working with all of our communities, all continuum of cares of California, to see how they're doing things and how we can partner up. And also know that there is many legal things going on with this NOFO that the coalition has not bought into. We have not started that going down that route, but we're hoping that if any legal things, whatever legal things are going on, that it is in favor of California and our community we're trying to serve. So yes, pay attention to important emails coming from CHSP team. They'll just be dropping really rapidly. We're hoping to get our policies and procedures approved by the Leadership Council today or by tomorrow so that we can open our competition and have you all start the process. Next slide. Awesome. So here are some resources. And we'll send this this slide deck out to you all following this meeting.